Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife decided to take a desperate step and hid from her husband. Today's story has a similar plot. Happy watching! She had the brightest topaz blue eyes I'd ever seen, almost transparent, a perfect shade of pale blue. Even in the dim light, they seemed to flare as she struggled to escape my grip. Pinned to the asphalt, her dark, curly hair scattered around her head like a lush fan. I held her tightly, but she was stronger than I had anticipated. She didn't waste any energy on screaming. Instead, she acted with skill and concentration. Her actions surprised me with unexpected force. Suddenly, she sank her teeth into my hand. I yanked it away, but her wrists slipped from my grasp. Before I could react, she lunged forward again, her movements quick and precise. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met, and I saw a slight smile tug at her lips. Then, without warning, she tried to bite me again. This time, I managed to react quickly, freeing my right hand. In response, she delivered a powerful knee strike that knocked me off balance. It was clear she was in excellent shape and knew exactly how to use her body in a fight. Everything changed after that. Her agility and strength became fully apparent as she broke free from my hold and stood up. Her movements were sharp, calculated, like those of an experienced fighter. I faced her, realizing she was trained in martial arts, which explained her precise and powerful blows. We stood tensely opposite each other, but I noticed she was limping. That detail gave me an idea for my next move. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a siren broke the silence, and we both instinctively straightened. I lowered my hands, watching her cautiously out of the corner of my eye as she did the same. The lighting brightened, and a grim, gray-tailed instructor approached us from the concrete blocks surrounding the training area. Outside the fence, I saw Level 2 students, their wide eyes fixed on us as they exited the observation room. The training ground was a rough mix of asphalt and gravel, about the size of a basketball court. A line of cars was parked along one side. "Agent," the instructor addressed her. She turned toward him but kept her gaze partially on me. "I know he's heavier than you," the instructor continued, "but when you throw him off, you must keep moving, press your thigh against his inner thigh. The main objective of this technique is to gain control from the top position. As you noted, even a strong blow to the groin won't always incapacitate someone with a high pain threshold. That's when you take the opportunity to escape." He shifted his attention to me. "Sergeant," he said as I half-turned toward him, still keeping her in my peripheral vision. "Good initial attack, and the roll after the release was the right call. But you should have gone for the sweep immediately. It would have saved you from broken ribs. Test complete. End of training." The indicator lights switched to green, and the tension in the air subsided instantly. The instructor turned and walked away toward the Level 2 students. I noticed some of the men openly staring at her in her torn underclothes, while the women shot me looks of mixed horror and disgust. She staggered as she tried to step forward, nearly falling, but managed to steady herself. Without hesitation, I stripped off my sweat-soaked t-shirt and handed it to her. She nodded curtly and accepted it. It looked ridiculously small on her, but she seemed to care more about staying warm than preserving modesty, if she had any left after the grueling outdoor survival, counterinterrogation, and combat training courses we'd endured. "To the infirmary?" I asked. She nodded and wiped her split lip with the collar of the t-shirt. "I can't walk on my own. I don't think anything's broken, but my leg can't bear weight." "A bad bone bruise, probably," I replied. "It's good this is my last day." "I can carry you," I offered, "but you'll need to keep your weight on my right side." "I need to bandage my ribs myself," she said, nodding again. Here, politeness was discouraged. Words like thank you and please were strictly forbidden to prevent students from forming personal bonds. I knew she was a federal agent, perhaps from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, or the Pill Enforcement Administration, since the instructor addressed her as agent. Similarly, she knew I was from military intelligence because I was addressed as sergeant. Civilians from intelligence agencies like the CIA were typically referred to as officers. No names were ever used here. The Level 2 students watched in shock and disbelief as I gently lifted her. Their surprise only deepened when she wrapped an arm around my neck. They didn't understand. They weren't field operatives. They were merely being introduced to how we trained here. Where was here? That was a bit complicated. Suffice it to say, the location was somewhere east of the Mississippi River. This place didn't officially exist. Its name changed frequently, assigned only an alphanumeric code. However, in the tradition of spies and scouts, it earned several unofficial nicknames: St. Tristan's Academy for Lost Girls and Bad Boys, Mistress Dominique's Emporium of Pain, and, most commonly, Antisocial Behaviour 101. The curriculum offered courses you wouldn't find at any standard university. Each student's training was tailored to their mission. Here are some courses I knew of. Disorder, hand-to-hand combat, general disorder. Small group combat without weapons. I didn't take this course, I usually worked alone. Stealth and counter-surveillance. Devastation and chaos, defensive and offensive driving. Mr. Wizard, improvised weapons and explosives. Young Pathfinder, outdoor survival. Alibi and lies, legends and cover stories. Extended beatings, counteraction to interrogation. Goat bones and chicken blood, technical surveillance. What we had just completed was the final exercise of the No Means No course, a comprehensive intimate assault prevention program for female operatives. Intimate assault is, understandably, one of the greatest fears for women working undercover. This course was designed to address that fear head-on. For the final scenario, the aggressors were male students who had completed the disorder course above standard. We were given specific instructions and some training to make the exercise as frightening and realistic as possible. Each male student was paired with a female student based on her psychological profile. Sounds terrible? It was meant to be. Only half a dozen female operatives participated at a time. They weren't informed about the final scenario. Instead, they were called straight from a restaurant exercise into the administration building. The shortest route took them through a supposedly dark and empty training ground. After 6 months of training, they weren't entirely unprotected, but they were never warned about No Means No. Their only indication was a red exercise begin light accompanied by a blaring siren. That was also our signal to initiate the attack. Even their uniforms, a garish yellow and red waitress outfit with a short skirt and flimsy blouse, were designed to make them feel vulnerable. It also served as a signal to instructors and aggressors, ensuring no Level 2 students were mistakenly attacked. We, the aggressors, were instructed to act aggressively, pushing the limits of realism. However, penetration was strictly forbidden, although everything else, within reason, was encouraged. For us, this was the final exercise of our last year. The male students left that evening, while the women departed the next day, following thorough debriefs. I carried her down the corridor in silence. Talking wasn't the norm here. The path was short, as someone had cleverly designed the building with the infirmary adjacent to the hand-to-hand combat training room. Injuries were frequent. The training ground itself wasn't exactly forgiving. Knives were dull but still metal, pistols fired rubber bullets with reduced charges, but they hurt like hell. No birthday cards were exchanged here. Everything was designed to prepare us for our work. We passed several people on the way, but no one gave us a second glance. Strange clothing and injuries were common in this place. When we entered the infirmary, the nurse simply said, "Room 3. I carried her there and laid her carefully on the exam couch. She winced as her weight settled onto it. I sank into a nearby chair, listening to the muffled sobs filtering through the walls. "Someone failed," she said, her blue eyes darting around the room. I nodded. "I think so." There was a long pause. Finally, without looking up, she asked, "So, what was with the excitement?" I really hoped she wouldn't bring this up. Over the past 6.5 months, the most significant physical contact I'd had with anyone was drowning drills and extended battering. Now, here was a beautiful girl with blue eyes, practically without anything, pinned beneath me. I'm only human. "This is almost a romantic evening compared to the rest of the program," I said with a smirk. "I understand that," she replied, "but why only toward the end? A girl could take that as an insult." I laughed. "I'm not attracted to night without a woman's consent. It's not exciting." She raised an eyebrow. But when I smiled, probably thinking about how I was going to hit you, you realized it was just a drill. I nodded. Exactly. When you bit my hand, that's when I knew this was another training scenario. And when I saw you smile, I realized you knew it too. She actually smiled at me then. I thought, if I stop resisting, maybe for the first time in 6 months, I'll finally have an intimate. Hell, if I'd waited another 30 seconds to dump you, I might have even enjoyed it. I wonder how the instructors would react. They'd probably criticize our technique. She giggled. I can already imagine it. Agent, you need to put more force into your thrusts, and your angle is wrong. She covered her face with her hands, trying to suppress her laughter but failing miserably, which made me struggle to keep a straight face as well. Then she looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears from laughing. Can you imagine the second-level students? At that, we both started laughing and couldn't stop for a while. Before we could continue our conversation, a slightly concerned doctor entered the room and began examining her. Afterward, she was given a pair of crutches. I had my ribs bandaged to stabilize them and reduce the pain. As usual, we weren't offered painkillers, only anti-inflammatory medication. As we exited into the corridor, heading in different directions, she looked into my eyes and smiled. I watched her leave, thinking about the heat I'd felt during the exercise, the touch of her body against mine when I carried her to the infirmary. It wasn't until I boarded the plane later that I realized she had never returned my t-shirt. 2 years later, my well-deserved vacation was interrupted when the department head, Donna, demanded that I come to the office immediately. Begrudgingly, I complied, arriving unshaven, in sandals, shorts, and a Joe's Crab Shack t-shirt. As I walked past her secretary into the conference room, I saw 2 formal suits, typical government employees, seated at Donna's desk, looking at me expectantly. Ignoring them, I turned to Donna. What's wrong with Mulder and Scully? I hope this isn't an FBI favor request. She glanced briefly at the 2 agents, who were clearly eyeing me with thinly veiled disdain. Donna looked irritated but should have known this was inevitable. Finally, the female agent spoke. What's your problem? I lifted the hem of my t-shirt, exposing the faded bullet wounds on my side. The last time I worked with you, one of your agents went on a cowboy spree. 3 of us got shot, including himself. I picked up his weapon and completed the operation. And in return, your agency wanted to prosecute me for not following instructions. I wasn't even supposed to have a gun. So when he went down, I guess I was just supposed to lie there and wait to die? I continued, if he'd waited another 30 minutes like I said, local law enforcement would have made the arrests without any issue. But no, he didn't want to share the glory. The agent fell silent, exchanging a glance with her partner before turning back to me. I told you that report looked strange, she muttered, then addressed me again. I'm not going undercover. Executive assistant directors rarely do that. And for the record, I'm the one who buried the lawsuit against you. That report made me suspicious. Look, we've brought in an agent who's just as hesitant about working with untested military assets as you are about working with us. If either of you gives the stop signal, we'll reconsider our options. I bit my tongue and nodded. Arguing with an executive assistant director of the FBI was above my pay grade. Donna looked pleased. I'll need to discuss this with her later. A moment later, the door behind me opened, and a female voice spoke. Ma'am, the technology looks great. If they just teach me the equipment, we won't nay. Her voice trailed off as I turned around. She stood there, staring at me, her wide eyes the same impossible topaz blue as I remembered. I was equally silent, lost in those eyes. She was the first to recover. Sergeant. Agent. Confusion rippled across Donna and the 2 FBI agents. Things were about to get interesting. I still have your t-shirt, she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. How's your dignity? I replied. Fine. It healed. How's your 5th place? Like new. You can keep the t-shirt. I've never been to REI. Her lips curved into a sly smile. I plan to keep it. It's my favorite nightgown. Donna raised an eyebrow, her expression intrigued. Your friend? A classmate at St. Tristan's school? The agent gave me a knowing smile. We had a very short but very intense, very physical relationship. I couldn't walk for a month. The two men in suits looked thoroughly confused, and the FBI agents clearly didn't understand. Noticing this, the agent decided to explain. We were adversaries in a one-on-one combat training scenario during a specialized course for undercover officers a couple of years ago. The male agent still appeared puzzled, but the executive assistant director nodded in understanding. That course does have a reputation for being quite brutal. The dark-haired woman continued to explain the scenario, but her account was dry and distant compared to my vivid and intense memories. Donna looked slightly worried. This may not work. I also trained there. I'm not sure how I would handle working with my ex-enemy, even after 10 years. The agent smiled reassuringly. I'll be fine. Yes, it was scary at the time, but it was just a training scenario. He was following his instructions, and so was I. Donna looked impressed. She turned to me. Are you ready for this? I nodded, keeping an eye on Emma out of the corner of my vision. If we work out the details so everything looks logical, I'm ready to work with her. We have the same training, and she stays cool under pressure. Emma. Her name was Emma, and she was incredible. She took the lead on crafting the operation plan, and it was a far cry from the typical mess federal law enforcement tends to concoct. Instead of the usual surveillance vans disguised as repair trucks or similarly conspicuous setups, we would simply rent a house and blend into the neighborhood. Emma even had her LPN, licensed practical nurse, certification and kept it current. This allowed the FBI to create authentic cover documents for her, and she could work part-time at a women's clinic on the outskirts of the area without fear of being unprepared. Meanwhile, I would work as a substitute teacher at local high schools. This arrangement gave us flexible schedules and ample time to observe our target while maintaining believable covers. We built our cover story together, newlyweds reunited after 6 months apart due to my teaching abroad under a fellowship program. Our primary goal was to infiltrate the Romanian quarter, where anonymous tips suggested weapons were being smuggled, not just for cartels, but more alarmingly, for terrorist cells operating within the United States. This mission was important to me. Anti-terrorism laws had allowed my transfer to the FBI as a technical linguist, and I was determined to see this operation succeed. The tips were vague, pointing only to the general area, but the court order we received must have been impressive. It granted us extensive latitude to conduct surveillance under the guise of critical government interests. We had a treasure trove of equipment, phone interception tools, parabolic microphones, cameras disguised as everything from lipstick to keychains, and listening devices hidden in everyday objects. For the next 4 hours, Emma and I worked tirelessly on the operation's scope, completely engrossed. Donna and her superiors eventually left, impressed but largely ignored by us. Emma's meticulous attention to detail amazed me. All that remained were minor adjustments, which was fortunate given that we had only 2 weeks before the mission began. Because we were clearly newcomers in the insular immigrant community, we decided to hide in plain sight by making a bit of noise about our arrival. On Friday, the day before we moved in, I walked through the neighborhood, leaving notes on doors apologizing in advance for the rental truck that might block the street. Our car still bore the faint remnants of just married signs, the soap on the windows poorly wiped away. A half-dozen men and women from our agencies helped us move, though their primary job was installing surveillance equipment in the attic and basement of our rented home. Emma started work at the clinic that same day. Everything went smoothly, as did the subsequent operation. By the end, 6 dangerous men and 1 woman with questionable judgment were in prison. As for Emma and me, those 6 months were blissful. We clicked immediately. She was perfect, smart, beautiful, cheerful, and deeply understanding. We didn't even try to deny our mutual attraction. On the first night, we ended up in the same bed. At first, I thought it was just lust. By the first month, I assumed it was mutual infatuation. By the 4th, I was convinced it was love. We shared everything, stories about our childhoods, past assignments. I told her about my time in a Buddhist monastery, hunting terrorists while fighting to stay awake during meditation. She shared her experience going undercover as a gay artist, a role she admitted to embracing a little too fully when she and her female partner became romantically involved. For Emma, who had spent her high school years in an all-girls boarding school, this wasn't new. But it was new for her partner, who eventually left the FBI, took the bar exam, and started a new life with another woman downtown. Emma and I built a life together during that mission. I brought her flowers. We had picnics and barbecues with the neighbors. We even babysat for some of them. I could see Emma as the perfect mother someday. Everything felt real. But it wasn't. Emma was ambitious, unstoppably so. She wanted to succeed on her own terms, and nothing could deter her. Her parents were unimaginably wealthy. Not just rich, but truly rich. She'd been raised in elite boarding schools in Switzerland, her childhood one long, grueling preparation to become the ruthless lawyer her parents needed to protect their business empire. She hated it. I hated every minute of school, she confessed. And I hated my legal career, even though I was good at it. So, after graduating, instead of joining one of her father's firms, she applied to the FBI. It was her rebellion, her way of forging her own path. Her parents were furious, threatened her, and ultimately disinherited her. Her ambition, however, never wavered. I loved her, and she loved me, but she couldn't sacrifice her dream, not for me, not for anyone. None of us could afford to commit at this stage of our careers. Commitment meant giving up undercover work, and working undercover meant we couldn't even continue to date on the side. We would have to break up completely. It was also dangerous. There was always the chance one of us could be killed or that the consequences of our work might follow us home. Emma was adamant. This decision upset her as much as it did me. Our last month together was filled with tender kisses, tears, and long nights. Every night, she clung to me as if her life depended on it, but in the end, she insisted we part ways. The operation ended quietly. Good operations always do. There were no loud shootouts, just knocks on doors and subdued interrogations. That was it, and a broken heart. 6 years passed before I saw her again. I had just finished my daily report when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, and clearly expecting me to recognize it. All she said was, "We need to meet at Walter Reed Hospital in the main lobby as soon as possible," before hanging up. I quickly looked up directions to the hospital and headed there immediately, telling the receptionist it was an emergency. After transferring from military to civilian service, I had taken over Donna's position, including her secretary. Donna had since moved up the career ladder, and now I reported directly to her, though I was responsible for my own operations. I found Emma standing in the middle of the busy lobby. Despite the years, she still had her commanding presence, though her once dark hair now had streaks of iron gray. It suited her. Her expensive, perfectly tailored suit spoke volumes, announcing her as a senior government official even without the bodyguard standing a step behind her, maintaining his security zone. As I approached, I could see the bodyguard's instincts sharpen, but I kept my hands visible and nodded as I drew closer. "Deputy Director," I greeted. Emma gave me a short, tense smile. It was slightly more polite than when we first met. Perhaps I'd finally learned some tact. Then a shadow crossed her face. "Emma," she said, her voice low. For a moment, I thought she was referring to herself, but then she continued. "Emma was injured in a car bomb attack in Turkey a month ago." I felt my heart stop. "She will survive," she added quickly. "She's in a medically induced coma while the doctors work on repairing the damage. She lost her right leg, part of her right arm, and will need extensive plastic surgery on the right side of her face." I heard her words, but I couldn't process them. Maybe she kept talking, but her voice became a distant hum. All I could think about were Emma's bright topaz blue eyes, the ones I had fallen in love with years ago. Through the crowd, I saw her, another woman, dressed in a rainbow skirt, her dark curls tied up with a pink ribbon. Her bright, curious eyes met mine. I didn't think, I simply walked toward her, my knees threatening to give way beneath me. I knelt in front of her, ignoring my surroundings and the expensive suit I was ruining. Someone said something, but I didn't hear it. Neither did she. Our gazes locked, filled with surprise. She was the first to speak. "Where have you been?" "Hunting bad guys," I replied. "But now I'm done." "They won't let me see my mother," she said, her voice trembling. "That's because they don't know how strong you are," I assured her. She reached out, and I took her small hand in mine. The woman in the rainbow skirt, Emma's nurse, I presumed, looked horrified. I stood up, still holding the little girl's hand. "Where is Emma's room?" The elevator ride was a quiet ordeal. I learned her name was Ellie. She was 5 years old, loved gymnastics, horses, and mango smoothies. By the time we reached the top floor, we were inseparable. Even the woman in the rainbow skirt seemed to accept it. I picked Ellie up and carried her to Emma's room. The nurse tried to stop us, but the bodyguard motioned for her to let us through. As we entered, Ellie tensed in my arms, gasping softly. The sight was overwhelming. Emma was surrounded by machines, catheters, oxygen masks, and monitors emitting soft hisses and beeps. I gently placed Ellie on her mother's right side. Mom is sleeping," I said softly. "But I'm sure she could use a tight hug." Ellie smiled through her tears and snuggled close to her mother. I turned to the deputy director. "Why now?" She hesitated, then spoke. Katie and Monica's guardianship rights were set to expire in a week, and Emma's parents were trying to take her daughter away. Emma would have hated that. Given her parents' level of wealth and influence, only the biological father would stand a solid chance of winning custody. The deputy director nodded. "Of course, I don't have to explain myself to anyone but Congress, but Emma swore me to secrecy. Leaving you hurt her much more than she could admit to anyone, but I saw it. She was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing, I thought, would have been to marry me and live happily ever after. But this wasn't the time or place for an argument." She continued, "This could be a real struggle. Emma's father is using his influence to create problems. Katie and Monica were denied a renewal on their apartment lease yesterday, and they need to move out within a week. Monica's bakery has already been inspected 4 times this week. I'll put a stop to it, but it won't take long before he starts targeting her suppliers." The woman in the rainbow skirt and another in a formal suit, Monica and Katie, I assumed, stood silently, their expressions unreadable as I spoke. I decided to lay everything out immediately. "I'm sure you don't trust me," I said, raising a hand to cut off any objections. "And why should you? You don't know me at all. But here's what I can offer. I have a farm near the Green Line. My house is large, an old farmhouse with 6 bedrooms, not counting the basement. You can stay with me for free until Emma recovers, or until you decide to leave." Monica stayed quiet, her gaze hard and skeptical. Katie, looking grim, finally spoke. "Hands down, just so we can keep an eye on Ellie. We promised Emma we'd take care of her, and we don't have a lot of options." I couldn't help but smile when I realized Katie was Emma's former partner from her art gallery assignment. Katie, however, looked at me suspiciously, and I decided not to bring it up. Monica likely didn't know about their past, and I wasn't about to stir up unnecessary drama. I explained where the farm was and gave them the address and my phone number. Katie said they'd come after grabbing some clothes from their apartment, which had mysteriously lost power the previous night. No one had been able to fix it. Monica looked at me firmly. "Don't get any ideas," she said. "Forget about fantasies of us walking around the house in our underwear. I have more important things to worry about than your preferences." I returned to Ellie's room, where she sat quietly, gently stroking her mother's face while the nurse hovered anxiously nearby. "Are we going to live with you now?" Ellie asked, her voice filled with curiosity. I smiled. "Small ears have long tails," I replied. She giggled, her wide grin lighting up her face. Taking out my phone, I showed her a photo. "I think Frankie will need your help," I said. She tilted her head, examining the image closely. "He's so cute." "Is he a pug?" "This little guy is a troublemaker," I said, grinning. "He could definitely use a friend." Her laughter filled the room. By the time they arrived at the house that evening, it was nearly 9 p.m. Katie and Monica looked around cautiously, while Ellie ran inside, squealing with delight. She nearly collided with Frankie, who wagged his tail furiously. It was love at first sight. Seconds later, they were rolling on the floor together, laughing and playing. Katie and Monica relaxed slightly as I gave them a tour of the house. It was an old manor, built just after the Civil War. My grandfather had left it to me because I was passionate about history, while my siblings inherited more land. I sold 30 acres to restore the house, blending modern conveniences with its historical charm. We chose a room for Ellie next to mine, while Katie and Monica's room was on the other side of hers. Adjusting to this new life wasn't easy. Ellie had to get used to wearing jeans and t-shirts instead of her usual dresses. Katie, and especially Monica, had to learn to trust me. That trust didn't come easily. Monica's attitude toward me softened one night when Ellie came down with a stomach virus. I stayed up all night with her, cleaning up, changing sheets, and comforting her. A few days later, while I was reading in the library late at night, Katie and Monica walked in, one after the other, with determined expressions. Both were wearing t-shirts and new Hello Kitty underwear. It was a deliberate gesture of trust, not repeated, but its meaning was clear. We settled into a routine. Each evening, one of us would spend time in Emma's hospital room, listening to the machines that kept her alive. On Saturdays, Ellie visited her mother for a few hours. A month after Ellie moved in, the custody trial arrived. Katie and Monica approached the judge while I stayed back with Emma's boss. Finally, I saw Emma's parents. Her father was immaculately groomed, wearing a $5,000 suit. Her mother was the picture of aristocracy in a Vera Wang dress. They exuded wealth and power. Emma once joked that she was surprised they had managed to conceive her at all, given how little they seemed to like each other. Their lawyer made his closing argument, and the judge nodded toward me. It was my turn. Emma's father looked bewildered. Clearly, his team hadn't done their homework. They didn't know why Katie, Monica, and Ellie had moved in with me. At the judge's insistence, I submitted DNA tests and explained that Emma had deliberately kept the truth from me to protect my career. But now I was sure that I was Ellie's biological father. Emma's parents' lawyer tried to object. So your work puts the child at risk? I shook my head. No, I don't do undercover operations anymore. There is no threat to security or stability. The deputy director supported my words. I also explained that Katie and Monica were willing to help me care for Ellie until Emma recovered. The court's decision was almost inevitable. Emma's father listened to the verdict with eyes devoid of emotion, like a shark. But her mother, on the other hand, was clearly shocked, her blue eyes filled with loss. As soon as the judge left the courtroom, Emma's father slipped out behind him, surrounded by a trail of assistants and lawyers. Emma's mother was left standing in shock, with only the driver next to her. I approached her. You can come to us on Sundays. But this is a farm, so you'll probably need jeans and boots. Call ahead. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I tried to raise Emma the way I was raised, but her character was different. I realized my mistakes too late. I would like to be a part of my granddaughter's life, even just a little. I gave her driver my address and phone number. The very next Sunday, she came, and every Sunday after that. Her name was Evelyn, and she was wonderful. She wore jeans that were a little too new, boots that were a little too fancy, and a simple t-shirt, but she came every Sunday, without fail. Ellie took her horseback riding, on picnics, and showed her how to make fires. Evelyn and her husband hadn't married for love. They had united to create a dynasty. On their wedding day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had jumped 253 points. But they essentially led separate lives. Unfortunately, Emma had remained their only child due to her father's health problems, not hers. After he transmitted the disease to her through night, all attempts to have a second child stopped. Divorce was impossible, as the financial losses would have been catastrophic. Evelyn had homes in France, Portugal, and New York, but she realized what she had lost with Emma and was determined not to miss out on her relationship with her granddaughter. She added an apartment in Falls Church and made it clear to her husband that if he continued any legal or illegal action, she would file for divorce, regardless of the consequences. This was completely fine with me, as my range of options for dealing with his pressure was quickly disappearing into the dark corners of human nature. It took another 3 months before doctors allowed Emma to finally come out of her coma. When she woke up, we were by her side. Ellie was sitting on the edge of her bed, and I was in the far corner of the room. Wordlessly, Emma hugged Ellie and held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. I stood back while she hugged Katie and Monica, giving them time to talk. Her clear blue eyes finally settled on me, and I saw them widen. Her lips parted slightly in silent apology. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry." Katie and Monica took Ellie out of the room, leaving us alone. "Sorry for what?" I asked. "For not telling you that I was pregnant. For not telling you about Ellie." She paused. "I understand you wanted to protect my career. Just like Ellie. I can't say it didn't hurt or that I don't regret missing the first 5 years of her life." She didn't know what to say to this, and silence fell between us. She spoke again, this time carefully. "I had dreams about you." I smiled at her and sat on the edge of her bed. "I've been coming here and reading to you 3 times a week for the last few months," I said, taking her hand. Emma smiled, a soft, almost shy smile. "I missed you so much." "I should have," she hesitated. "I don't know how to fix all this." I shook my head. "We'll have enough time to think everything over. Ellie will be very happy when you come to the farm." Emma looked a little puzzled. I explained that Katie, Monica, and Ellie had moved into my farm. Her face twisted with anger when I mentioned the problems with their rental, and her jaw literally dropped when I told her that Evelyn had started coming to visit. It didn't take much convincing to get Emma to come to our farm, given the united front that Katie, Monica, Ellie, and I put up. We also had Frankie, who was willing to help us, which led to an epic dog chase through the hospital corridors and almost cost me a hospital ban. Evelyn's status as a major donor saved me from serious trouble. It took a month of physical therapy before Emma was able to move home with us. It took another 4 months for her to move into my room. Ellie was very supportive of this idea, and we were still us, whatever chemistry we had, it turned out to be indestructible. The scars and missing leg didn't matter to me, and they made Emma's recovery process easier. She gave up going undercover for Ellie and has now accepted the fact that she won't be able to work in the field anymore. Emma began doing supervisory work and gradually rose to the position of deputy director. The hardest thing for Emma was accepting Evelyn. It took 4 years and 2 more children before she fully trusted her mother. We ended up with 2 additional houses on our farm, one for Katie and Monica, and one for Evelyn. Evelyn no longer wears Vera Wang dresses, but her jeans are now well worn, and she still has a taste for expensive boots. Ellie's first child, our granddaughter, had been born just seconds before I laid eyes on her for the first time. Her name is Alyssa, and she's great. She has the brightest blue topaz eyes I have ever seen. They were cold as ice, almost transparent, the color of the frozen heart of a glacier. They sparkled with suppressed rage as she attacked. I felt ice crystals cover my heart as her voice cut with the precision of a surgeon. There was not a drop of love or human affection in her voice. She didn't even notice me standing in the dark corridor. Yes, she had never really seen me before. I was almost invisible to her, even in the best moments. And since I was rarely home due to boarding school or vacations, and only really forced visits to network with other descendants of the elite, I wasn't even sure she would have recognized me on the street. Although, of course, she would never have had to walk down the street. Her victim stood calmly, as if the words she hurled at him with contempt had no meaning. Despite their weight, he would never touch her again. There would be no other children. There would be no reserve for an heir. Now it was all on me. I was doomed to become Reinhardt. The father blinked a single time, the only movement on his face, carved as if from stone. "Okay, she'll do it." It was the only glimpse of emotion I ever saw from my father, almost an outburst of rage by his standards. And that's what was expected of me. I was raised to be the heir to the greatest financial merger ever made. Reinhardt married the brilliant daughter of New York Reinhardt. It sounded like something from the Middle Ages, and in a sense, it was. So the head of the Reinhardt house was never called by name. His name was simply Reinhardt. This tradition continued even as traders became bankers, and then venture capitalists. The trading house turned into an empire so huge that no one knew exactly where it began and where it ended. I was trained from birth to lead this huge enterprise: private schools, tutors, elite boarding schools in Europe. Math, economics, and statistics were drilled into me as soon as I could read. Tanda began at the age of 5 to teach me self-discipline, quick thinking, and to prepare me for the less obvious but equally brutal battles of the financial world. From the very beginning, my education and life were designed to make me a corporate lawyer. Financiers and economists could be purchased in the required quantities. Lawyers were a problem, like Machiavelli's mercenaries. A bad lawyer could ruin you, and a good one could turn out to be too ambitious, but they were necessary. And so, Reinhardt's heir studied law in order to control the lawyers. So my fate was predetermined from birth, and I hated it. I didn't know what I wanted, but it definitely wasn't this: a life of almost absolute privilege and power, a life without meaning. I was raised by servants who were constantly changing. My mother ignored me. At some point, I found out what a real mother is, and from then on, I began to call her Evelyn and not Mom. I almost never saw my father. Reinhardt was too busy to bother with his only child. I suspected that he really wanted a son, but when he infected Evelyn with a disease from one of his many helpers, that possibility disappeared. She was not interested in his affairs. She had a yoga instructor and a massage therapist. His carelessness turned her indifference into active contempt. I have seen the destructive influence of money at this level. They ruined everything, everyone. Trust was impossible, and there was no need to talk about love. So at 13, standing in the teak-paneled hallway, I learned that my dream of perhaps escaping my fate was shattered. Oh, I rebelled over little things. I ended up losing my virginity to a Norwegian ski instructor, and the next morning, I found a pack of pills on my sink. I could no longer find this instructor. Every small rebellion was either cleverly neutralized or ignored. My future loomed like an iceberg. Everything was according to their plan. I did well. I was the future Reinhardt. My early education and discipline produced the expected results. I studied hard, researched logic, law, always best in class, certainly. But I continued to fight secretly. I was looking for a way to escape. I almost broke down in law school. I met a guy. He was funny, smart, witty, and knew how to push all my buttons. I confided in him, told him about my disgust for the life I was being led into. He listened and seemed to understand me completely. He wondered if I could turn this life into something I would love. No matter what, he sounded so reasonable and smart. And then it turned out that he worked for Reinhardt. I never knew whether he was sent to me or just recruited when we started dating. Then I realized that I could no longer trust anyone. Anyone could work for them, and even if they started out with the best intentions, sooner or later, money would eat away at their souls, just like everyone else. So, I continued to hone my skills and strive to be the best. I turned out to be the best at pretending to give up. I played by the rules, continuing to look for a way to salvation, where their money had no power. When I graduated from law school, I told them that I needed to take the bar exam in New York, where the world of finance was, and that it would take several months, maybe a year and a half, to prepare for the position they had reserved for me. As expected, I passed the exam on my first try. They were in no hurry and did not suspect anything. I moved into an apartment and started training to live without money. Then I realized that I didn't know anything about living independently. Half of my clothes were ruined while I was learning to do laundry. What about cooking? I lost 5 kilograms in the first month. In that first month, I decided that I needed to occupy my days with something while I was looking for my way out. A flyer in the lobby caught my eye: nursing courses. And, as with everything else, I turned out to be damn good at it. It was a great way to learn about normal people and learn to be normal. I liked this most of all. I was completing my last internships in different hospitals when I found my way out. A shootout in the city center claimed 2 lives and 3 were wounded. Most of them were gang members, but one of the wounded was an FBI special agent. He was brought to our hospital, reinterpreting Hans Gruber. I was looking for a miracle and found the FBI, an almost incorruptible FBI. I applied immediately and waited patiently for the process to be completed. I didn't seriously think they might not take me. I had never failed, and I studied tirelessly for the physical tests, taking lessons at shooting ranges with every type of firearm possible. One of the instructors I hired with Reinhardt's money was a retired FBI officer, the other a former Delta Force fighter. By the time classes at the academy began, I was as prepared as possible. The rest of the students were typical hard workers, full of ambition and determination, best in their classes, football and volleyball stars, cheerleaders, and several guys from the chess club. But they were not thoroughbred horses, and at first, our relationship didn't work out. I honestly tried, to fit in, to become one of the team. Everything went wrong. On the third day, I don't know what I did or said wrong, but someone sniffed out something. I heard whispers of Rich and found myself isolated. Maybe they thought I would get bored and leave. To hell with them, they had no idea what loneliness was. I grew up much more alone than they could have imagined. This isolation lasted for weeks. Their attitude changed after the first match in our fourth week. The instructor watched us carefully. He recognized my style and my abilities. I'm 5 feet 3 inches, by stretch, so when we were paired up, he put me against the biggest and strongest guy in the class and winked at me. This fight lasted 23 seconds. My second fight lasted almost a minute. The next day, my nickname changed from Rich to Dangerous Mouse, and they began to treat me with respect. They accepted me, although they didn't love me. It was the warmest feeling I've ever experienced. After 6 weeks as part of a team, at graduation, I realized that my deception had failed. A hand-carved rosewood box was delivered to my room. Inside was a bottle of 1928 Krug champagne. It could only be Evelyn, for the sake of appearances, of course. Reinhardt had never given a gift in his life. I returned home to face them before taking my place in California. This meeting was unpleasant. Reinhardt was silently furious. Evelyn was coldly furious, and I had a $20,000 hangover and an empty bottle in my luggage. Suffice it to say, by the end of the 15-minute conversation, I was disinherited. I silently left the office, collected my unpacked luggage, and left. Whatever fantasies I had about being a special agent quickly evaporated. At first, it was endless rounds of paperwork and meetings, but it seemed more real. I was good at paperwork, planning, and gathering details. It was several months before I was assigned to any real operations, other than the usual small cases that are left to junior agents. And this was entirely due to blind luck and my terrible culinary skills. I was given a message that one of the defendants in my case was being taken away. They indicated the time and address, and I went there. The funny thing about case numbers is that if you get one number wrong, everything goes wrong. The wrong agents are sent to the wrong places. So, when I arrived and saw the HRT, hostage rescue team, then sitting quietly on the edge of an area that was clearly no match for the harmless crook I'd been gathering material on, I put on my apologetic junior agent mask and went to tell them the bad news. They'd sent the wrong agent. There was a tense atmosphere inside the van as stern, armored agents studied the building's layouts and animatedly discussed plans, backup plans, and plans for backup plans. The whole scene reminded me of wolves preparing to hunt. I spent many evenings watching the Discovery Channel. I looked around, trying to find at least someone familiar. No one. I stood quietly, waiting for someone to ask what I was doing here, and then I would tell them about my mistake. Finally, the bald man who seemed to be the center of all this activity suddenly turned his attention to me. "Who the hell are you?" I tried to explain, but he interrupted me with irritated fury. "Holy Jesus, save me. Does your mommy know you're here? And does she know that you have to cross the road to get here?" A wave of mirth swept through the room, but I noticed one elderly agent with a steel gray haircut who was lazily sitting on the table with a map, looking at me, clearly expecting me to pay attention. The Reinhardt in me rose up. "Yeah, she sent me to drag you back to the nursing home to give you an enema." The bald man turned red with anger, but before he could say anything, the gray-haired man spoke. "Dave, wait." Dave turned to him. "Mike," the gray-haired man said, looking at me. Turn around. Something in his voice convinced me to do it without asking questions. How much do you weigh? 52 kilograms, maybe on a good day. Your clothes are loose. I'd say you're about 48 now. This was probably true. My cooking skills hadn't improved much. I ate a lot of salads, mostly because I either undercooked them or burned everything else. I nodded. He examined me carefully. She will walk through the window with such a skinny butt. We could try the dream option, whatever that means. Dave was dubious. She's not from HRT. If anything goes wrong, we'll be under attack from the director. Mike smiled a grim smile. Nothing will go wrong. This is Danger Mouse. Jorge told me about it at the academy, economical size, full 5th place, packaged for pleasure. He turned to me. Isn't it? I straightened up. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to miss it. It's me. Nobody wanted to argue with Mike. Soon, I was squeezing through a small hole and down into the pitch-dark basement with a tiny flashlight and a compact .45 caliber pistol, which Mike insisted I replace with a standard .40 caliber bureau gun. Mike was confident that standard bureau weapons weren't powerful enough to guarantee a first-shot kill. So armed, I began to look around in the darkness. It smelled of mold, damp stones, and dust. Even with the flashlight, the darkness pressed in like a black velvet blanket. I completed the task, but now I was the favorite daughter. A month later, after the mandatory post-shooting cooldown, I was selected for special training for secret missions. I'd never seen training like this, terribly realistic, eerily effective. The pressure was unrelenting, and the exhaustion was so complete that I didn't dream at all. Every week, we were given psychological exams. I was raised like Reinhardt, and no one was mentally stronger than me. But even for me, it was a seemingly endless series of trials, sleepless nights in any weather and on any terrain, constant interrogations, round after round of combat training. None of this remotely resembled the usual step-by-step, safety-first standard training. I enjoyed it, teeth bared, even if sometimes they were bloody. The last test was devastating. They took my biggest fear from my assessment and included it in the script, synchronicity of fears captured by psychic assessments, and these fears were used against me. When the script began, I was knocked off my feet by an overwhelming force. My opponent was chosen for his enormous strength and given detailed instructions on how to make me feel helpless, how to be disruptive. It was terrible, but I had an ace up my sleeve. The breakup was an old, fading fear. My nightmares were dominated by cold blue eyes. At least I could fight the breakup, and I did. My opponent had the chest of a boxer, the abs of a wrestler, and the pain threshold of a battle tank. He took my best shots and still hit my 5th place. I was done. I couldn't really fight because of that hip injury, and he knew it. I saw in his eyes a respect that was bought at a price, but he began to inexorably lean toward my weak side. But that wasn't my biggest concern. I already saw something in those eyes. When he pressed me against all logic, we got in touch, realizing that we were participants in a crazy scenario, that it was all a game. And for a split second, I felt more real human warmth than I had felt in my entire life. This precious moment cost him a groin injury and broken ribs, but it cost me more. Our relationship scared me more than the fear that this scenario could actually allow real violence. I could still fight it. I might have lost, but I could and would fight to the end. But this connection also seemed like something that needed to be fought. All my adult life, I have kept men and women at arm's length. Who knew who my tireless parents might send? Professionals, convincing, impeccable people who can make anyone's heartbeat faster, or they would just buy anyone. I talked to them, their money could buy a lot of regard. I wasn't sure that Father and Evelyn had refused to make me a Reinhardt. At the end of the script, when he carried me to the infirmary, the magnetism was overwhelming. I found myself starting to press myself against him. He gave me his shirt in a chivalrous gesture so that my hand rested on the bare skin and muscle of his shoulders. We joked a bit while we waited for the doctor. The connection only became stronger. There was some undeniable chemistry, something more than just lust. If there had been a door in the room, I would have seriously broken the rules. A few more minutes, and I would have stopped caring about the door. The doctor arrived just in time after I picked up my crutches and said, "Off I go." I looked back and saw him watching me. Part of me wanted to go back and give him my real name, part of me wanted to run as fast and as far as possible. I kept his shirt and slept in it. I didn't even wash it for a month. It had to be disgusting, but that's not true. He was far enough away that I could indulge in a tiny fantasy or two about a normal life. The dots of our blood mixed on the shirt were a symbol of something that could have been, maybe in another world. I ended up washing the shirt on the hot water setting to remove the blood. I learned this the hard way. It would be another 2 years before I saw him again. Over these 2 years, I proved myself again and again. I wanted to be the best agent ever born. I had the upbringing, ability, and ambition to make it happen, and keeping track of these things helped keep my own demons at bay. These dreams of porcelain blue eyes became smaller and smaller but never disappeared, always stirring me up like a hard, cold hand squeezing my heart. I worked a lot, and I had support. I knew Mike gave me the nod, and it carried a lot of weight. As a result, I was sent to headquarters. I worked mostly with organized crime. It's not as cute as counterterrorism, but because of the illegal substances, the work is never ending. But these were not all prohibited substances. I spent 6 weeks working as a waitress in a San Angelo bar when I helped take down one of the largest cattle rustling rings in history. To do this, we collaborated with the Texas Rangers. This is a great organization, but the rustling of cattle? Texas Rangers? Well, yes, hi. Some smart guy pinned a thrift store cowboy hat to my office wall, but I have the real thing at home, along with a pair of sparkly boots, jeans, a western shirt, and a bandana. I kept my waitress uniform. I was almost killed in a shootout in Canada over cheese and maple syrup. It's a thing there, believe it or not. Cheese is heavily taxed in Canada, so criminal gangs smuggle cheese north and unlicensed syrup south across the US border. For weeks of freezing my 5th place off, wearing flannel shirts and sleeping in a shitty room above a Canadian pizzeria. Things went wrong just before we served the warrant and ended in a real shootout when I ran next to a Royal Canadian Mounted Police sergeant in a cheese warehouse. These are people who take their mozzarella very seriously. As for my personal life, I simply didn't have one. I immersed myself in my work. I had no life outside it. I couldn't trust anyone not to be corrupted by Reinhardt's money. The closest I came to a relationship was a few drunk makeouts with another agent, Kat, short for Catherine, while we were working undercover as a gay art dealer couple. I didn't take it seriously at all, and all-girls prep school almost guarantees the experience of a relationship like this. But for Kat, it was life-changing. She never thought her problems in relationships were caused by the fact that she was actually gay. She left the agency and got a permanent girlfriend, Monica, who owns a bakery for the production of cupcakes, seriously, and wears too much tie-dye. In fact, any tie-dye is too much, but she wears it in such quantities that it's even impressive. However, they seem more than happy together. Monica tried to distance herself from me when she learned about Kat's past with me, but she eventually realized that I wasn't a threat. I didn't get into a relationship. I didn't even have real friends, other than Kat and Monica, and I kept them at a distance. However, the work was going great. I had a talent for planning and execution, thanks to my upbringing, and this was recognized by most of the people I worked with. Moreover, I was a fanatic, tirelessly driven. I didn't notice this until one day when I ran into Mike in the office hallway. "Dangerous mouse," he said. Nowadays, only members of the HRT team use this nickname, and there was a modicum of respect in it. I smiled slightly. "Mike, I hear you're doing a great job. I knew you would be good. I knew that you were one of us." He stopped and looked serious. "Continue, Mouse. Someone has to kill the monsters. One of us. One from us." These words hit like a hammer. Mike was more than just an agent, he was the head of the HRT group, a paladin, a knight in shining armor, a true believer in every sense of the word. And that's what he meant, and I realized he was right. I stopped doing work for my own sake or for the sake of the work itself. My ambitions were still unquenchable, but now there was something more. I really started to believe. For the first time in my life, I was following a dream of a better world. And so life continued at full speed until one day, when I was working out at the gym, an elderly woman with gray hair stood on the treadmill next to me. I didn't really look at her, probably someone's secretary in her manner. However, she ran well. "I heard you're a star here, maybe the next Hawthorne," she said. "That's what they say." Maria Hawthorne was the executive assistant to the director. There were legends about her. She was believed to be the toughest woman on the planet. It was rumored that even when congressmen didn't contact her, and it wasn't just politics, early in her career, she ruthlessly exposed arms and human traffickers. I don't know if it's true, but rumors claim that she personally killed 8 people. I shrugged. Maybe, but what if it means I'm stuck in the office? "This is not for me," I said. We exchanged a few more routine pleasantries, and by the end of the day, I had forgotten about the conversation. I was right. She really was someone's secretary to Maria Hawthorne. A week later, when I walked into the assistant director's office, I knew it was a trap as soon as I saw that woman. She just smiled and nodded, showing me the door. I was called without ceremony, just through a yellow note that landed on my desk. Tall, thin, with dark brown hair pulled back into an almost severe updo, Hawthorne was standing to the side of her desk when I entered. She extended her hand to me. "It's nice to meet someone who is said to be the next me," she said. I prepared to gently excuse myself, but she interrupted me with a smile. "Let's go for a walk, Emma." She led me away from the building, and a minute or two later, we were on the street, heading toward the Smithsonian Institution. We walked in silence until we were far away. "Mike recommended you." "For what?" "There's one problem. I sometimes discuss problems with him. He does a good job of helping me put things into perspective." I sensed that her relationship with Mike was more than just a work relationship. I checked her information when I received the call and found out that she was single and Mike was a confirmed bachelor. I ignored it. She continued, "We have a case. The team behind it presented the plan this morning. This is an ideal plan from the Bureau's point of view, and on paper, it looks great. And I hate it. The Romanian network we monitor has avoided such pitfalls too often. It's a different part of the network, but we've failed too many times with these guys for it to be a coincidence. These are very bad people who are transporting very dangerous weapons, and if we don't capture them, a lot of innocent people will die." "So, what is my role?" I asked. "I want to use people outside the Bureau. These guys may have connections with Russian intelligence services, or simply understand us too well and can anticipate our actions. Or," she fell silent, "or we have a leak. There's a lot of money involved in this game, even the FBI isn't perfect." There was silence as I processed her words. She stated the obvious. "You cannot be bought. I know about your parents. You can walk out the door at any time and have more money than all of us combined. I'm sure they will take you back." It all came down to money again, but she continued, "That alone is not enough. Mike says you are the agent who will do whatever it takes, that you are ready for anything. You've worked with many external agencies, and they've spoken well of you. Not everyone knows how to collaborate with others." We stopped at one of the many street food stalls surrounding the Smithsonian Museum. She ordered a couple of gyros. I told the seller that I wanted them cooked before my eyes. Maria raised an eyebrow. "I worked for Eurocards in New York for 3 weeks during observation," I said. "They have pre-made gyros behind the counter that are made ahead of time. They can be prepared several hours ago, maybe even a day or two." We found a bench and sat down to eat. "I'm removing the Bureau team from this case," she said. "I'll say that the General Counsel recommended attacking the other end of the network. The only people from the Bureau who will be in the know will be you, me, Mike, and my assistant. I asked the director to lend us one army group. This is Operation Kummel and Green." I didn't know what it was and told her so. She shook her head. "You should know. They do not work for domestic purposes in the Eslov insurrection, but I can get them as technical resources to fight terrorism. But these are not ordinary soldiers. They work undercover around the world, mainly in the field of counterterrorism. These are the best of the best. They have to be because where they work, they essentially become the bad guys. We're always just one call away from help. If help comes to where they are working, that's already a very bad moment. They are incredibly capable, but they are not police, federal or otherwise. The last time we used one of them, the operation went wrong, and a cumulant agent took the gun of one of our special agents and killed 3 pill dealers without even trying to arrest them. The general counsel was furious. They weren't too happy to be working with us again, and I had to ask the director to push it. Great. Sounds promising, I said. There's a good chance they'll despise me. Refusal of such an offer would mean the end of your career, she said. I finished my gyros and looked around. I'm in, I said. Culin Green was a small brick warehouse converted into an office on the outskirts of Georgetown, with underground parking. The sign said copy limited, and it looked harmless enough. But the valet was the human equivalent of a Doberman, a beacon of alertness and restrained aggression. So were the 4 guards inside, through whom we passed. The secretary checked our IDs, called to make sure we were expected, and then let us in. One of the guards escorted us inside. I didn't know what to expect, but it looked like a standard office, no different from mine, except it was a little more shabby. The people there were different. If the FBI was full of jocks and cheerleaders, then this place was a haven for those who smoked at the far end of the school parking lot. They were dressed decently enough, standard suits from Washington stores, a little more personal than you'd expect from the bureau. But what really stood out was the intense weariness with which they watched us. Even if they didn't show it explicitly, they didn't seem to particularly like law enforcement officers of any kind. We were shown into an office with a conference table, where we were greeted by a stern woman in a formal suit. After Maria introduced us, the woman simply replied, "You can call me Donna." Maria seemed to have expected this and explained what we needed, and, to my surprise, shared her suspicions about a possible leak of information somewhere in the Ministry of Justice. Donna motioned for her secretary to call Eric, who turned out to be a short, stocky guy. He invited me to come with him to see the technical support that would be provided to me 3 floors below, in the basement. I found myself at a crossroads. We walked past the gym, the shooting range, and into a room that looked like it had been hit by a runaway Radio Shack. We had to step over wires, boxes, and half-assembled computers to get to the shelves at the end, where the most modern surveillance equipment was stored, equipment I hadn't even known existed. Most of these things were not supposed to be used on U.S. soil. I practically skipped back up the stairs, and when I found myself in the middle of a clearly tense moment, a wave of feelings washed over me. I saw a familiar face. A wave of emotions hit me like a school crush, and suddenly, the module of witty remarks turned on in me. I started making sarcastic jokes, which he immediately picked up with a knowing smile. Donna seemed quite pleased with this chatter, while Maria looked thoughtful and her assistant looked completely confused. I decided to clarify the situation and explained where we had met, although I left out a few details. And, of course, I didn't mention that my heart was pounding as if it was going to jump out of my chest. The rational, logical part of my brain screamed at me to run, but the rest of me had a completely different idea. When he agreed to work with me, and as it turned out, when it was in doubt, I felt both relieved and afraid. I asked Maria's assistant to bring me a folder with my notes. I sat down at the end of the table, and we began to discuss plans. When I looked up again, Maria, Donna, and her assistant had already disappeared into another room. We acted very professionally, discussing infiltration plans, prioritization, and goals. He was thrilled that I had an emergency evacuation plan that could actually work. The hardest part would be the initial setup, and he was working on a list of people to do it. This may sound a little crazy, but legally, it would be the only way the transferred asset could be handled. His people could deliver the equipment and install it, but they had no right to turn it on or test it. However, they could stand next to an FBI agent and tell him, in real time, how to do it. So, I'd have to ask Maria to add 2 agents for this job. He was professional, respectful, and incredibly distracting. It turned out he was on shore leave when he was called in, and he had no time to do anything other than spray himself with a little cologne. As a result, he smelled like cologne and that special scent of hot skin you get after the beach. He had this most annoying habit of looking me straight in the eyes, and it distracted me. By the time we finished, we had managed to tell each other very little about ourselves. Although, I did manage to mention that I wasn't in a relationship, and I found out that he wasn't either. That didn't help my internal dialogue at all. The day we moved to the Romanian quarter was a real discovery. The cumulant green teen was as convincing as they could be. One couple stumbled out of the car, arguing loudly and forcefully about his behavior at last weekend's party. He was drunk and behaved disgustingly. This was clearly a long and bitter dispute that had dragged on for several days, but it was all complete nonsense. They weren't even assigned as a pair until 3 days ago. Furniture for the newlyweds was delivered without any problems, accompanied by the typical jokes that accompany newlyweds. And when my guy went to get pizza, he came back with pizza and beer for everyone, plus flowers from the pharmacy for me. It doesn't seem like much, and yes, it's part of the cover, but this was the first time in my life that someone had given me flowers. And that was probably visible on my face. One of the intelligence operatives took one look at me and whispered, "Ooh, looks like someone is going to get something today." Her eyes sparkled in the dim light as she mockingly teased me, implying that something intimate might happen between me and him. The words sounded mocking, but for some reason, they struck a nerve. Although it was all part of a cover, he looked at me, smiled slightly, and handed me the flowers. I couldn't say anything. For the first time in my life, someone gave me something just like that, without a goal or selfish motive. It was a strange, almost shocking feeling. The next few days passed quietly. We set up equipment and tracked the target, but I couldn't get him out of my mind. He was polite, professional, but the way he looked at me haunted me. It seemed like he could see right through me, and I wasn't used to someone studying me so carefully. That evening, he and I returned to our apartment after work, and I still couldn't get rid of thoughts about him. He went into the shower, and I settled on the couch with a book, trying to distract myself. But when he came out, the smell of fresh cologne mixed with his natural scent threw me off again. We started chatting, and the conversation smoothly moved into more personal territory. He told stories from his life, and I shared mine. I noticed that I was becoming more open with him than with anyone in a long time. At some point, everything changed. I couldn't resist the attraction I felt. It felt like all the barriers I had built over the years were crumbling. He was nearby, and our jokes turned into something more intimate. We both knew there was more to it than just physical attraction. That night, I gave in to my feelings. We were no longer just colleagues on a mission, there was something much more between us. I tried to convince myself that this was just part of the cover, that it was just another way to be convincing in the role, but that was a lie. For the first time in my life, I felt something that could be called real affection. However, I understood that this wouldn't last long. As soon as the mission was over, I would have to leave. We both knew our lives were too complicated to be together. I pretended that everything was normal, that this was just a temporary hobby, but inside I was torn apart by contradictions. Several weeks passed, and the operation was coming to an end. We successfully completed our mission and exposed the Romanian network, but I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. And then things got even worse. I missed my period. I tried to reassure myself that it was just stress from the mission, but my intuition told me otherwise. A few days later, I bought a pregnancy test and took it in the bathroom of our fake home. It was positive. The world around me collapsed. I brought up in the logic and cold calculation of Reinhardt, who simply decided that this needed to be eliminated, remove this random set of cells. It would seem that this should have been simple. Yes, it was meant to be, I told myself. It would be easy. Just a small medical procedure. Nothing complicated. But in reality, it was not easy. No way. I never planned to have children. I never thought about it seriously. My life was full of secrets, and how could I fit a child into this chaos? It seemed impossible. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how he played with the kids in the neighborhood while we were on a mission, how his face lit up when he laughed with them. And then the nightmare came, the same one that had haunted me before, but with renewed vigor. I saw the same cold, blue porcelain eyes in front of me. Only now they were looking straight at me and uttering words that I could not forget. "Mom, please." I woke up in a cold sweat, barely able to stop myself from screaming. He was sleeping next to me, and I quietly slipped out of bed so as not to wake him. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat there, trying to convince myself that I was doing everything right. I told myself that this was just a collection of cells, that this was not a real child. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more those icy blue eyes loomed before me. I looked in the mirror, and a woman looked back at me with the coldest blue eyes I had ever seen. They belonged to me. The operation was completed. It didn't make headlines, but those who cared knew the mission was a success. This operation was supposed to secure my place in the elite. I stood in Maria's office, already clearly pregnant. I had avoided her for 2 months after the initial interrogation, then took 3 months of leave, citing the need to recover from the mission. And now I stood there, waiting for her to judge me for my personal failure. She tilted her head to the side. "Did you tell him?" And everything came out at once, my fears, my nightmares, everything that had accumulated. She just silently led me to the couch and let me cry on her shoulder. In the end, although she didn't agree with my decision not to tell him, she supported me. She said I was too valuable to lose. I was transferred from secret assignments to work on planning counterterrorism operations. This was a significant increase. Kat and Monica had been a real lifesaver for me. They helped me and even attended the birth, although it seems that all 3 of us forgot about the breathing exercises. They handed me Ellie. She had the brightest blue eyes I'd ever seen, almost unreal. They radiated warmth and love. Working in counterterrorism planning meant I now spent more time at home, and when I was away, Kat and Monica always helped me with Ellie. I thought about calling him almost every day, but the fear of them was too great. I was afraid they would destroy it, as they would destroy everything they touched. I loved him too much to let that happen. The dreams of cold porcelain eyes never returned, but several nights a week, I snuck into Ellie's room to check on her, to hug her, to make sure she wasn't sitting in the corner, curled up under the covers. Years passed. Ellie grew up. I don't remember anything about Istanbul. I was there for 3 weeks and 2 days. I remember getting on the plane, thinking that when I got back, I would need to issue a new power of attorney for Kat and Monica. Then, I remember waking up in the hospital. I saw everyone, especially him. He wasn't mad at me, he was sad about missing time with Ellie. But people from our world tend to be extremely pragmatic, so he understood at least the version of the reason that I voiced to him. It took years before I was able to tell him the whole truth. I already knew that I had lost my leg when I came to my senses, but when I heard about Evelyn, I almost screamed in horror. When she came to me, she was different. In jeans, her icy arrogance had completely disappeared, and she had the saddest blue eyes I'd ever seen, almost transparent, the color of endless tears. I'd never heard her apologize before, never for anything. But now, she was asking for forgiveness, not for herself, because she didn't think she deserved it, but for a chance to participate in Ellie's life. For a chance, even a small one, at redemption. I set strict conditions and watched her like a hawk. She had already warned Reinhardt, threatening to destroy his world if he tried to get close to me again. She was still a little cunning. He thinks that the sword hanging over the fireplace that she gave him for his birthday is a replica of Napoleon's sword from the Battle of Lodi. This is not a replica, but only Evelyn and I know the truth. So many years have passed. Yesterday, I held my granddaughter in my arms for the first time. Her name is Eliza. She's wonderful and has the brightest blue eyes I've ever seen. What do you think of our next story? In my opinion, this story was interesting, but the wife should not hide her daughter from her husband. It is not right. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.